This is the agenda for tonight. I'm going to go through my background and how I ended up in product management. Then we'll touch a little bit on product management 101 very, very briefly. Then 5 tips to transition into product management. Then I'll touch on what to do once you have the job and any questions that you guys have. So my background. At university, I studied psychology and neuroscience, so it had nothing to do with product management at all. I think this is always good to highlight because especially today, people find their way into product management in so many different ways. I think I overheard you do music or did music, like that's great. And there's always something transferable there. So right out of school, I went to Percolate. Has anybody heard of Percolate? Yes, okay. So we are an enterprise SaaS company. We do marketing software for very large companies throughout the world, MasterCard, DHL, Bosch, and it's a pretty traditional SaaS company. So we have a large product with many different product managers, about 60 engineers, and we're set up that way. So I actually started on our marketing team. I was doing product marketing. So the idea there is that you take the product that is given to you and then you market it, figure out ways to position it, sell it, package it up so that people then buy it. From there, I moved into what is called customer marketing. So this is fairly common at SaaS companies today where you are trying to get your customers to market the product for you. So we do a lot of case studies, partnerships, events, and also just generally getting closer to the customer to figure out what are their core use cases and how can you enable them to use the product better. And then coming out of that, I moved into product management, which is what I've been doing for the last year and a half or so. And even within product management, I've had many different roles, worked on different products, so it's been very interesting. Cool, so I'm going to give quick background on product management. Most of you probably know this, but I think it's important to explain the lens where I'm coming from. So product management, I think you focus on 4 core abilities, and I like to talk about abilities here versus skills because abilities are things that probably don't change so much over time, and so it's really important to look at this list and look deep inside of you if these are things that you enjoy doing and you think you're actually good at, because you'll be doing a lot of this in your day-to-day. So the first is communication. Probably you've heard this. You're communicating with a ton of different people throughout the company and outside of the company. And this is regardless of where you are, you're going to be communicating up to stakeholders, down to other internal folks, sideways to your customers, every which way. The second is project and time management. So this one is a big one. Even though you're not managing the time of engineers directly and you're not responsible for their time, you do need to keep your projects and products on time and make sure that releases are happening in a timely manner. So this is a big one. The third one is systems thinking. So in general, you want product managers to approach problems and general customer pain with a systems mindset to figure out what is the most scalable way that you can deliver a solution. And then the last one is analytical thinking. You're going to be doing a lot of research. You might be doing cost analyses, figuring out how to price your products, and so that's a key piece. And then there's obviously many, many more skills that you will gain over time. So these are things like what is the difference between front end and back end, becoming more technical. Also any piece on the UX side, learning how to design actual products. Those in my mind are all skills and you can learn them over time as long as you know how to learn things. So the next piece I like to focus on is difference between technical product manager and product manager. So you might see job descriptions out there for a TPM. It is very different from a PM. A technical product manager typically will wear the Scrum Master hat if you're familiar with the Agile framework. They might be more technical in nature. They often have a software engineering background. And they're generally more responsible for the efficiency and effectiveness of the engineering team. So they'll see how can we make the engineers work faster, what types of things are blocking them over time, and how to gain efficiencies. The product manager will typically wear the product owner hat, and they can be less technical in nature. They don't necessarily need a software engineering background, and they're generally more responsible for the overall product vision and execution. And obviously, as part of this, you want to be motivating your engineers and figuring out ways to get them to work better together, but that does not fall specifically under your purview. So what I'm focusing on today is the product manager side. I've never been a TPM. I don't want to be a TPM, but this is good for you to keep in mind as you're looking at different opportunities. The other piece, and I think this one is actually much more important, is consumer apps versus enterprise software. So consumer apps is on the B2C side, so business to consumer. These are things like Evernote, Netflix, Spotify, Facebook, Fitbit, all of these very cool companies that we think of. And in this case, the buyer of the app is typically also your end user. So if you think about something like Evernote, when I download Evernote, if I then upgrade to a paid subscription, I just bought it and I'm also using it. In this case, you can find and interview lots of users. Think again of Evernote. They have a huge customer base. You can run great A/B tests. And so in general, in this bucket, I would say people tend to be more data-driven as well, and sort of having to do robust analytics to figure out what works and what doesn't. And then they have a short transactional sales cycle, which also translates to the way that the product is released. On the enterprise side, this is your B2B software, so business to business software. Percolate falls into this category, Oracle, Salesforce, Workfront, think of any of these giant enterprise software companies. And in this case, the buyer is typically not your end user. So whoever is sitting in the room signing the paper might log into your software, but they're probably not your core user. And this is really important for the product manager because I am building software that needs to be bought by one person and appeal to that person, but then needs to be used by someone else. It can be more difficult to interview users because you might have a smaller base or just a less accessible user base. It's very difficult to do A/B testing because you can't change parts of the software system for small groups. So you need to rely on prototypes, and so I would argue there's a stronger design thinking component here that falls on the product manager. And then there's very long sales cycles, which impacts how the product is built. So I am on the enterprise software side. I love it. It's the best. I definitely have found my passion here, but this is very, very important to keep in mind because for some people this is not appealing or attractive at all, and consumer apps is where they want to make their mark. The other thing I'll say is that making a decision here early on can be great because you can become an expert in that one area and then more easily transition to other companies as you go on. And just understanding the difference here too can really help in interviews, I think, because it shows that you know something about software. Okay, so with that as a background, I'll now walk through my 5 tips to transition. I will caveat this again with these are not hard and fast rules. These are things that I've seen in my transition to product management, and I think that they can really help depending on where you are in your life cycle. So I'll go through these in more detail, but tip 0 is to excel at your current job. That's generally a good rule of thumb. First is to talk to current PMs and identify any gaps in your abilities. Second is to try to switch within your current organization or within the organization you want to go to next. Third is to get closer to the customer or product. Fourth, identify an internal champion or mentor. And then fifth is to start doing the work. So starting with step 0, I think this is self-explanatory. It's really important to be good at your current job because that is what people will remember you by and what you are using in your interviews. So particularly if you're trying to transition within your company right now, it's very important that you build a strong track record early on. So the first one is to talk to current PMs and identify any gaps in abilities. This goes back to what I was saying earlier, where there's a soul-searching component here to really figure out if the abilities match what your strengths are today and sort of what you enjoy doing. Particularly with product management, it's pretty hot right now. It's a really exciting area and everybody's trying to get into it. But it's definitely worth thinking about whether it really is a good fit for you. And in talking to current PMs, you will get a better understanding of the landscape. So I'm sure many of you are doing this today, but to my point earlier, maybe you talk to some TPMs and some PMs. Maybe you talk to some people in consumer apps and some people in enterprise software, and you start to see which is more interesting to you and where you could actually see yourself going. So the second one is to try to switch within an organization. And this one I think is so critical for a few reasons. First, you are only switching on one dimension. So within your organization, you know the product, you know the people, you've built rapport. It's going to be much easier to succeed if you try to switch within your organization because you're not changing a bunch of things at a time. The second one is actually something my boss told me, and his mentor said he exclusively hires product managers within his organization because it's a green field and you can train them how you want them to operate within your organization. And I see that as a pretty common thread amongst product management professionals where they want to train you. Everybody does it a little bit differently, and so they don't necessarily want someone that already has learned bad habits somewhere else. So that's a big one. And then the other piece here too is that you just know a lot more people within your organization and it'll be easier to do any sort of networking that way. So this is how I made the switch, and I'll go into this later, but it really, I don't know that I would have had the opportunity to do it somewhere else. So the third is to get closer to the customer or the product. So the product piece is important because as the product manager, it is your responsibility to drive forward the vision of the product. So the better you know the product, the better you can be at your job. And for myself, when I started in product marketing, this was key because I had to learn the product. I was on our marketing team, so I was also a user of our product. And I knew the product in and out, probably knew it better than 99% of the company. Similar if you're in customer success right now, that is a great role actually to transition into product management because you understand what are common bugs that people are facing, what are people trying to do with the product, what can't they do today, all of those inputs that are important. And then similarly, you want to get closer to the customer. So account managers, for example, work very closely with the customer. They understand what they're trying to achieve in the product. Again, from an enterprise lens, they understand what workflows they're trying to do. And so this can be great for them when they transition into product management because they know exactly what is going on. The thing I would warn there is, especially if you're in a role where you're working with a small subset of customers, it's very important for you to take a step back and take the time to look at all of the customers. Because ultimately you will be building a product for everyone. And so especially as you're interviewing, it'll be important for you to show that you understand a core need across all customers rather than the couple that you've been focusing on. And then fourth, which is a general life tip, is to identify an internal champion or mentor within your organization or externally. This is critical later with your success, but also just internally making sure that you can move. So in my case, once I decided this was what I wanted to do, I started to plant the seed and tell more and more people that it was something I was interested in. I told the director of product management, I told our chief product officer, and then when one product manager left, I was the next person that everyone thought of because there was now a spot open. And this can also be great. In my case, the director of product management also prepped me for all my interviews. She sort of explained what are the do's and don'ts of product management, which was really helpful. And then the last one is to actually start doing the work. And in some organizations this works and in some it doesn't. But especially if you're in a role that supports product, you can just start shadowing product managers, figuring out what they do every day. Maybe you can start to help them on some requirement docs. Maybe you can improve their process, whatever it might be. So within customer support, we had someone switch over and she started working more closely with the PMs and helping us figure out a faster way to triage bugs. And it wasn't directly related to product management, but it put her on everyone's radar and she was helping us and it was great. So this can be a really nice way, or even if there's smaller parts of the product where you can do mini PM work, that's helpful. And in my case too, on the marketing team, we had a website, and if you go to percolate.com, our website, and we had dedicated engineers for that website, marketing engineers. So I just started to pick up some work for our website just to get used to working with engineers. So you got the job, now what? There's a couple of things that I think are important to focus on once you actually do move into product management. So the first is to continue leaning on your internal champion or mentor. So because they transitioned you into product management, they have some skin in the game to make sure that you succeed. So that is someone that you want to rely on and they will want to help you. The other big piece is to continue shadowing and connecting with more experienced PMs, because once you're there, there's still going to be a big learning curve. And so maybe you shadow people on sprints. Maybe you ask them to share old docs with you, templates, whatever it might be, because that can really help. And then the third is to ask for formal training. This is actually, I think, where the product school comes in. So this was huge for me because I really didn't know anything about product management. So Percolate paid for me to become a certified Scrum product owner, which was a 2-day training. And you basically just learn about agile software development for 2 days. I did this before I transitioned. I highly recommend you do it 2 to 3 months in. It can be really helpful just to see how the organization does it, learn a little bit of context before taking that kind of a class, because then once you're there, you can see what are the differences, what are even ways your organization can improve, and it'll all make much more sense in context. And then the last is to go through a full release cycle and write down your learnings after each one. I think that's the sort of amazing thing about product development, is the same thing keeps happening over and over again in a cyclical fashion, and so you can get better at it. And so depending on how long your release cycle is, maybe you even do it for 2-week sprints, whatever it might be, you can write down whatever you've learned from that cycle and then apply it to the next one. Okay, so those were the 5 tips to transition. Some of them obvious, some of them less obvious, hopefully.